You say to yourself, I would love to have this guy's body. Wow, look at how beautiful this man looks.
What up, guys? It's the Tominator, and we're going to be picking up where we left off and counting down the top 20 most aesthetic bodybuilders of all time. So if you didn't already see the first part that features numbers 20 through 11, I suggest you go check that one out first, and I'll put a link somewhere. But in this one, we finally come to crack that elusive top 10, and I'm going to be honest with you, as well as part 1 was received, because it didn't have a single dislike last time I checked, I fully expect this video to probably not go down so well, because there's at least one guy most of you probably expected to be a shoo-in for this list in this top 10, but who I deliberately didn't include, and I have my reasons for that, but we'll get to that in the honorable mentions in a little bit. But anyway, first up in that 10th position, we have another underappreciated bodybuilder in Charles Claremont. So this guy competed back in the early and mid-1990s, doing battle with the likes of Flex Wheeler and Sean Ray and Dorian and all those Hall of Famers, which is why he probably doesn't get as much love as he deserves, because he was overshadowed to an extent for sure. But man, did he ever have a pleasing physique. So here he is doing what looks to be a bodybuilding rendition of the famous Thinking Man statue. Very classy pose. Best way I would describe this guy is he's basically a white version of a young Flex Wheeler, say Flex from back around 1990-91, because he's got pretty much the same lines and complete development and a very similar shape and structure. Here he is, I believe in 1993, judging from the background, hitting an aesthetic version of the front double bicep pose. And here showcasing a sick set of abs, intercostals, and serratus. As with many of the other guys on this list, the midsection was razor sharp and on point. You can see the side chest as well in the background. Claremont also had a great back as well, as we can see in this shot, looking perfectly shapely and complete in the back double bicep. He's just damn near flawless from head to toe, with superb separation and symmetry. And not sure if you can make that out, but if you read the quote to the side, it's pretty much hits the nail on the head, because it basically says that there's nothing freaky or in your face about his physique, and I couldn't agree more. It's just very elegant and classical. Number 9 is Brian Buchanan, another almost forgotten bodybuilder from the mid-80s to early 90s who had probably the most insane proportions of any bodybuilder in history, okay? So I'm not joking when I make that claim, and I don't say it lightly, because this guy's arms were just enormous balloons, and he had a waistline to make most women jealous. I mean, come on, look at that. So I'd argue he probably had the best and most exaggerated V-taper ever, as you can appreciate in this epic picture right here. Plus, the guy had bellies in all the right places. No bubble gut, but just roundness everywhere else. And note the excellent separation between the pecs and front delts, and the upper pecs and the traps. Hell, even his forearms managed to somehow look sinuous and aesthetic here. Some guys are just blessed with supernatural genetics, and Buchanan was one of them. To me, this is the best front double bicep pose of all time, bar none. As if the arms, tiny waist, and V-taper weren't enough, the guy can also pull off a vacuum. So need we say more? This almost doesn't even look real. I mean, you'd think it's Photoshop, but it's not. It's just lights out on everybody. And lastly, we see him in an elegant twisting bicep pose. And if you can pull your eyes away from the upper body for a moment, he's even showcasing some pretty good calf development downstairs as well. So he had great total body development, just a magnificent physique through and through. Criminally underrated, Brian Buchanan. Wila Brada comes in at number 8. They called him the mass with class because he was a smaller guy but filled out his slighter frame quite well. His structure was excellent with a really good shoulder-to-waist ratio, narrow hips, and he had that total body development with no real weaknesses. His only real flaw was that he was too short, and so he tended to be overshadowed and outmasked by taller competitors. And here we have a statue of Lee. Oh, wait, that's a real picture, man. What? Dang. So yeah, Lee was one of those bodybuilders who was positively statuesque. And that's not only owing to the physique, but it's largely a result of his masterful posing, because he was really good at showcasing what he had, too. And Lee was able to do many of the old school aesthetic poses pioneered by guys like Frank Zane. So this is completely taking a page out of Zane's playbook. Not too many bodybuilders can hit this one well, with arms overhead here. But with his more athletic and leaner frame, Lee was well suited for poses like this. And I would say that Wila Brada is an example of a bodybuilder who is highly polished, as his conditioning was always on point. And this is one hell of a side tricep pose as well. I mean, I really can't even pick out a single flaw. Coming in at number 7, we have the Oak, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I feel if there's one area where Arnold is underrated, it's the aesthetics. Because I've seen other most aesthetic lists like this. I believe it was Flex Magazine who did a top 20 as well, around a dozen years ago, and they didn't include Arnold. Like, to me, it's utterly baffling, as many would consider Arnold to have the most perfect body of all time. I mean, look at him standing here in the gym with his massive chest and arms, looking better than freaking Superman, right? It's true that Arnold had his flaws. He had a number of them, actually. He had weak quads and hamstrings, his shoulders tended to suffer next to his outstanding pecs, and his triceps were likewise a little undersized compared to his mountainous biceps. And Arnold also even admitted many times that his waist was a little bit wide, and that's why he tended to twist in almost all of his poses to kind of hide that. And many of his detractors will continually point this out to this day. But man, by today's standards, that waist is absolutely top-notch. I don't really see anything wrong with it. And despite not having the best balance, there's something almost, I don't know, majestic about Arnold's physique. There's just something so unique and mesmerizing that you can't help but appreciate the aesthetics. I mean, the guy was better built than Hercules with those enormous arms and probably the best set of pecs of all time. Furthermore, he had a vast arsenal of aesthetic poses and could probably pull off a greater variety of artistic poses than any other bodybuilder out there. So, for example, here he is doing the Steve Reeves arms to the sky thing as though he's holding an imaginary globe overhead. Note the perfectly developed ribcage and serratus. I don't get how anyone can do a list like this and not feature Arnold. I mean, yeah, he had his flaws, but he was just too iconic and his physique is timeless. Next up, we have Franciscan Lotto at number 6. Here is, again, a lesser-known guy from the 80s who probably doesn't get nearly the amount of credit he deserves. In my opinion, he's kind of like a blending of the last two guys, because you can see the huge arms like Arnold, yet the more balanced and smaller physique like Wila Brada. So this picture is Hall of Fame material, and I think a sculptor would be hard-pressed to create a more perfect-looking model than what we see right here. It's easily one of my favorite pictures of any guy in this entire list. Let's just admire the aesthetics for a minute, bro. So Fado, like Banu before him, was also known for the impressive crucifix pose, and he makes it look like a breeze, when really this pose is one of the most difficult to pull off because without the ideal structure and proportions, it's not going to look good. And here he is doing the straight arm pose a la Larry Scott and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he pretty much nails it too. He's got mass and spades, but it's not overdone like most of the bodybuilders of today. And it's not just the arms here, but also note the calves, especially on the far leg, and see how long those muscle bellies are? This guy was genetically blessed, that's for sure. His side tricep was also one of the best of all time in my reckoning. I love the way he pulls his arm back really far, really stretching the bicep in the front delt and drawing more attention to that sucked-in midsection. It's a nice, unique touch he puts on a rather standard and by-the-book pose. At number 5, we have another one of my favorite bodybuilders, Shawn Ray. Looking better than a Greek statue here in this meadow. What's so appealing about Ray's physique is that he has pretty much everything you could ask for. Full muscle bellies, great balance and structure and shape, and tons of detail and polish. Like many of the other guys we've seen so far, he was also a very accomplished poser, as well as you can see him putting a neat spin on the regular front double bicep. This was from 1994, probably his best shape ever. And if you ask me, Shawn Ray also had the best ab and thigh pose in history. It just doesn't get any better than this from the 1992 Mr. Olympia. The entire midsection is just saturated with definition and separation. The obliques are streamlined as hell, and his abs are almost perfectly symmetrical, so what more could you want? From the side, you can see he wasn't lacking anything in the lower body either, and I don't think I have any back pictures, but best believe all this polish you're seeing from the front and the side was evident there as well. And here on the beach, he's looking absolutely unreal. I don't think you could Photoshop it to look any better, really. Again, this sort of beach body thing is pretty much absent from modern-day bodybuilding, as unfortunately the mass game has gotten out of hand, and most of the guys look like they're about 5 months pregnant, right? All I gotta say is thank God for the 70s and 80s and 90s. At least we had a couple good decades. But at number 4, we have Bob Paris, another guy from the 80s. They hailed him as the second coming of Steve Reeves, and you can see why. The guy was tall and looked like a male model, with a lean, athletic look rarely ever witnessed in a bodybuilder. His presentation was flawless too, and the guy was one of the best posers ever. This kneeling pose right here is the one he's probably most famous for, and now you see why he's so high up on this list. This is pretty much aesthetic perfection in a snapshot. And Bob Paris, he has another one of those types of physiques we'd all love to have when walking down a beach. There's nothing freaky or overdone here, it's just beautiful lines and pleasing shape. His relatively high lats give him more of a Y taper than a V taper, but if anything, that only seems to accentuate his height and trim waistline. So this is back in the day when women would actually be attracted to bodybuilders, and most men wished they looked like a bodybuilder. Not like today, where most of the guys are just massive freaks who look like lab experiments. So Bob Paris had class and grace in spades. And coming in at number 3, Frank Zane. Really, how could you not have Frank Zane on a list like this? He's basically the father of aesthetics. I'm sure many of you would probably have him at number 1. So here he is looking damn near perfect on the beach and quite possibly the most aesthetic front double bicep pic you'll ever see. Zane was a different breed of bodybuilder. His physique was more akin to the guys competing in the physique division today than the typical bodybuilder, but that's precisely what allows him to be so aesthetic. For my money, he has just enough mass to fill out bodybuilding poses properly and look good in most of the mandatories. I love this photo because with the darker contrast and lighting, it looks like someone literally carved him out of marble. Talk about statuesque, right? Lots of guys have imitated him, but nobody else can do these sorts of poses better in my opinion. The vacuum especially. Zane simply owned this pose. I do believe he was the first to truly master the art of the stomach vacuum. Sure, many guys had done it before him, but nobody to my knowledge could pull it off quite as well. At least not until Tony Pearson came along after him, that is. And once again, on the beach, looking like a buff Keanu Reeves. Even the beard is aesthetic, man. Look, he's definitely slim for a bodybuilder and about as lean as you can get for this sport, but let's be honest, who wouldn't want to look like him? And like Bob Paris, this is the kind of accessible physique that anybody can appreciate. Not just men who are into bodybuilding or hardcore lifters, but more importantly women and the general public as well. So that's why I put Zane in the top 3. But at number 2 is another bodybuilder from the 70s who looked even better in my opinion, and that is the Black Panther, Serge Nubret. For my money, he had all the statuesque, eye-pleasing factor of Zane, plus more mass and roundness. So personally, I prefer Serge's physique a little bit more. I mean, there's no other bodybuilder I feel that can basically just stand there and look as good as Serge did. He was impressive from virtually any angle, as we can see from this back pic. Even the shape of his lats and traps is aesthetic. Everything just flows absolutely perfectly on this guy. And his physique has stood the test of time. So these pictures right here still look better to me than any of the physique or classic bodybuilders or social media dudes today, despite all of them having access to better drugs and supplementation than Serge had at his disposal. So this is just straight up amazing raw genetics right here. He even manages to make basic poses like the side chest look elegant and effortless. I really don't know how to explain why this guy's physique is so aesthetic. Sure, I could trot out all the same cliches I used to describe the other guys, like the round muscle bellies, the great proportions, the pleasing shape and polish, etc., but somehow trying to put it into words just doesn't seem to do it justice. I mean, this guy's so damn good, you could easily put him in that number 1 spot, and I wouldn't even bat an eye. The top 2 are definitely very close, but in my opinion, there's one other guy who edges him out by a hair. But before we get to that, let's just go through a couple of honorable mentions first, because even on a list this long, it was still hella hard trying to narrow it down to even 20 guys. You know, I could easily rattle off another 20 bodybuilders right off the top of my head because there's been so many commendable physiques over the past 50 or 60 years. But for the sake of time, I'm going to limit these honorable mentions to just 3, okay? And first and foremost, we have Steve Reeves. Wait, what? Blasphemy. I know. Hold on for a second, guys. Many of you are probably thinking I was going to put him in that number 1 position since he's one of the most influential figures in the sport of bodybuilding and basically the godfather of the whole aesthetic movement. So I'm sure I'm going to catch a ton of flack for excluding him, but before you smash that dislike button, hear me out. So the thing with Reeves is that it's really hard to compare him to other bodybuilders since it's essentially comparing a natty to guys on steroids. So number 1, it's not a level playing field here, and I'm not grading these guys on a curve. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. I mentioned this in my last video on the 4 archetypes of aesthetics, that guys like Reeves were pioneers who paved the way for bodybuilding, and he no doubt is extremely aesthetic. But is this really what you would associate with a bodybuilding physique? In my humble opinion, no. Reeves looks tremendous, of course, but he doesn't look like a true bodybuilder to me. I don't mean that in any sort of disrespectful or derogatory way. It's just that the level of mass he's carrying really isn't sufficient. This is more like a physique competitor's body, and personally it's a little too slim for my taste. So guys like Brada and Zane and McCowie, they're about as lean as I'm willing to go on a list like this, and I feel like Reeves looks underwhelming compared to more modern bodybuilders, especially in mandatory poses like the front double bicep. I mean, here we got a direct comparison of him being completely outmassed by Frank Zane, the slimmest Mr. Olympia in history. So this is what I mean. He really didn't have the necessary level of muscularity, in my opinion, to be considered a true bodybuilder. Guys like him and Reg Park and John Grimmick, Eugene Sandow, all these guys were seminal in laying the foundation for bodybuilders to come. But they themselves I consider more as precursors of bodybuilders, and not truly bodybuilders as we commonly think of them. Now, I know somebody's going to point out that he was in fact pretty big and had 18.5, 19-inch arms and all that. Well, that's all well and good. But I could honestly care less about measurements. Bodybuilding's all about appearances. It's about creating the illusion of looking big. Obviously, little guys like McCowie and Brada would weigh less and might even have smaller measurements than a taller man like Reeves. But the thing is that they look bigger and fill out their smaller frames better than he did. So that's what counts in my mind, not just the circumference of their biceps. And since I already mentioned that I'm not really factoring in influence or legacy or compensating for the era in which these guys competed, I don't think that his physique, in comparison to all the others we've just seen, truly warrants a spot on this list. Now, obviously you're free to disagree, and I'm sure many of you will. I realize this is a very contentious decision to omit him, and I debated for a couple of days as to whether I would actually go through with it, but ultimately I gotta be real with you and give my honest opinion, so that's my reasoning. And by the way, for those of you who are crying foul right now, forget about Reeves for a second, because you should also be complaining about not having this guy, Jim Hayslop, who for my money is actually a slightly improved version of Reeves, but since he didn't have the same level of fame and influence, I'm sure most people have never even heard of him. But the guy was basically Reeves with a little more mass. He could hit that same overhead pose that Reeves was famous for, as we just saw. And here he is standing next to Arnold and Franco, not getting dwarfed whatsoever. He's measuring up quite well, looking very aesthetic. And you can see that he fills out the front double bicep better than his counterpart. So I feel like Reeves is honestly a bit overrated due to his impact and legacy. And you could say the same for Arnold and Frank Zane for that matter, but the difference there is that both those guys had more impressive physiques if you ask me, and theirs have stood the test of time more than someone like Steve Reeves. Again, this is all very much personal preference, and I don't expect everyone to see eye to eye. But anyway, one final honorable mention goes out to Milos Sarcev, another guy who I'm sure some of you are wondering right now why he didn't make the list. And looking at this first pick, it's difficult to fathom why he didn't, since he looks absolutely amazing. But the reason I didn't include him can be seen here in this second photo. Notice the obliques? They're too thick. They look like love handles, quite frankly. So the blockiness at the waist and the thin, mediocre arms are the main reasons why Milos didn't make the cut. Because other than that, this guy's pretty damn good. And you can certainly find a lot of pictures of him looking really aesthetic like that first one, or this one right here, or the front lat spread here in which he displays an awe-inspiring X-frame. But those flaws I just mentioned ultimately keep him from cracking the top 20. The guy definitely had a great set of abs and wheels though, that's for sure. But anyway, now finally we come to number 1. And this, in my opinion, is the most aesthetic bodybuilder of all time, and of course we're talking about none other than the mighty Branchosaurus Rex. Oh, wait, wrong video? Oh yeah, get this thing out of here. Okay. For real though, in all seriousness, coming in at number 1 is, to no one's surprise at this point probably, since he hasn't been featured thus far, the Sultan of Symmetry Flex Wheeler. He brought a package that was almost too good to be true. It looked like he just stepped out of a Marvel comic book, with roundness everywhere, the tiny waist and joints, the incredible shape and proportions. To my eyes, he's basically a modernized version of Serge Nubret, with slightly more mass and better definition. And yes, those two were very close for me. It could go either way, but the reason I ended up putting Flex on top is that at his best, like back in 1992 and 93, this guy's physique was perfection. I'd say that in the 1993 Arnold Classic, and even the Olympia that year, even though he wasn't as sharp there, Flex brought the most aesthetic package the sport of bodybuilding has ever been privileged to witness, and truthfully, I don't see it ever being surpassed. Now, I know he has a lot of haters and detractors out there too, who are quick to point out his synthol use and his alleged calf implants. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's ever actually been any conclusive proof that he had calf implants. To me, they don't look fake, but then again, I'm no expert on the subject of calf implants. It's certainly not something you see very often, like, say, breast implants, which are generally pretty easy to spot, right? Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it all just kind of started based on accusations made by Sean Ray, and people have just been kind of bringing it up and continually regurgitating it to this day. So I'm not even going to comment on that anymore, one way or the other, because at the end of the day, it all just seems to be kind of baseless accusations and rumors. As for the synthol, yes, Flex has admitted he used it, but to my knowledge, that was only towards the end of his career, around 1999, maybe 1998 as well. Around that time, you can definitely notice it in his rear delts, and sometimes his arms look suspiciously smooth too, but the thing about it is that no matter what, Flex still looked aesthetic. So even at his worst, when he was too big and soft, the guy had better shape and lines than like 99% of his competition. And back in 1993, when he was at his best, I would bet money that the guy had zero oil in his body, because I challenge you to find an area that looks smooth and watery or has that telltale lumpiness of synthol injection. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's nowhere to be found because the guy was simply diced from head to toe, and that was all real solid muscle. But enough about all that crap. Can't we all just stop debating about what drugs he did or didn't take and just admire the aesthetics? The guy looked phenomenal from any angle in almost any pose. Check out the ab and thigh, undeniably one of the best ever. And we've all seen this legendary photo. This must have been taken later in his career, probably around 1999, because the extra mass is evident, but the aesthetics don't suffer in the slightest. If you're telling me that those shoulders and arms are full of synthol, then at this point I think all we can do is laugh and shake our heads in admiration and admit the guy used it properly, because either way this looks incredible. Phew. Yeah, so that's it for my top 20 most aesthetic bodybuilders of all time. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And just to reiterate what I mentioned at the beginning of the last video, obviously with this sort of list I expect a lot of opposing opinions given the subjective nature of bodybuilding aesthetics. So, after all, it is what they say, bodybuilding's in the eye of the beholder. On that note, if you disagree, that's cool, that's perfectly fine, but let's try and keep it civil. I see way too many people in my videos acting immature and butthurt, acting personally offended when I criticize a bodybuilder, and throwing insults around left and right because they don't agree with something I said. So let me just warn you right now that any kind of disrespectful crap like that, whether it's directed at myself or another commenter, is going to be deleted, okay? So let's try to keep it mature and constructive. And lastly, everyone, thank you for watching, and feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more. As always, I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.